right, so I'm not a scientist. I work in the far more honorable profession of writing business books. And before that, I worked in the ever more so honorable profession of writing speeches for politicians, including a stint as speechwriter for Vice President Al Gore. And because of that, sort of earlier in my career as a political speechwriter, people often ask me, Dan, what makes a good speech? And I've thought about that question quite a bit over the years. And I have determined that good speeches in general, and good speeches when you follow three people with a combined IQ of 5,000 in particular, always have three key elements, three key ingredients to any good speech, anywhere, anytime. They are brevity, levity, and repetition. Let me say that again. Brevity, levity, and repetition. So I promise to be reasonably brief, keeping with the pop tech tradition. I promise not to be too severe and serious about it all. And I promise you I will repeat the important stuff over and over and over and over and over and over again. Now, as Andrew mentioned, the title of this session is A Whole New Mind, which also happens to be the name of a book that I wrote. And I should say that that's because Andrew rejected my idea for the name of this panel, which was to have me, and then Steve, and then Luann, and call it Pink, Pinker, Pinkest. But he said ixnay on that, so what are you going to do? All righty. As I mentioned, I'm a writer. And there are many annoying things about being a writer. Among them, not having tenure, many annoying things about being a writer. And one of the things is when people say to me as a writer, Dan, you know, a picture's worth 1,000 words. I hate that. It's not wrong, it's just profoundly irritating. But I think that good writers, and I think that the people, the innovative minds in this audience know that, yeah, a picture is sometimes worth 1,000 words, but sometimes a metaphor is worth 1,000 pictures. Thank you. That metaphors, one person not profoundly overwhelmed by that comment, metaphors are worth 1,000 pictures. And my job here is to kind of be the connective tissue between the science and some of the things that we're doing later on today would have to do with the economy and with creativity and so forth. And I think that there's a metaphor that explains a heck of a lot of what's going on in the economy today, and that's our brain. Our brains, as all of you know, are divided in half. You've got your left hemisphere and your right hemisphere. Now, many of you have heard about left brain this and right brain that over the years, and unfortunately, much of what you've heard is garbage. This is one of those ideas where the popularization of the idea has gone way ahead of the science. But in the last several years, the science has caught up, and we now know, thanks to functional magnetic resonance imaging, a lot more about how our brains function. And actually, in the book, A Whole New Mind, to make sure I got the science right, I actually went to the National Institutes of Health, did a series of experiments to see my own brain in action, which was profoundly disappointing, but that's another story altogether. Here's what we know, okay? Here's a lateralization of the brain in 30 seconds or less. Our brains are very complex. We use both sides for everything that we do. But at a broad level, they're also very elegant and efficient. Over time, thanks to evolution, in part, our brains have divided up tasks. They have different specialties. The left side specializes in one set of tasks. Tasks that are logical, linear, sequential, analytical. Right hemisphere specializes in a different set of tasks. Not better, not worse, different department. Specializes in tasks that are about processing things all at once, tasks that are about the context of a situation rather than the text, and tasks that are about synthesis rather than analysis. Now, I think that division of labor in our brains offers us, I think, a very powerful metaphor, for understanding what's going on in economies today. And here's how the metaphor works. It used to be that the abilities that if you think about advanced economies in the final third of the 20th century, the abilities that mattered most, the abilities that were most essential, were characteristic. It's a metaphor. Characteristic of the left hemisphere. They were the logical, linear, sequential, analytical, SAT, spreadsheet, zero in on the right answer abilities. Those were the abilities that predominated. Those were the abilities that were at the heart of parental advice in middle-class families throughout advanced economies. This is why my parents told me to go to law school, even though I didn't want to be a lawyer. Said, oh, you got to do that. It's something to fall back on. No, which is a classic expression of middle class. And I actually I did go to law school, as a matter of fact. I didn't do especially well. Which is one reason I became a writer. I actually graduated in the part of my law school class that made the top 90% possible. But that's another story. And it turned out, actually, that ironically enough, for me, that as someone who ended up studying sort of the effect of educational attainment on performance in the workplace and earnings, it turned out that law school did have a profound, I would argue, permanent effect on my lifetime earning power, because in law school I met my wife. But otherwise it was a total loss. But that was what it was about. It was about those kinds of abilities, those logical, linear, sequential, left brain kind of abilities. And today, my argument here is that those abilities still matter, but they matter less. And a different set of abilities, a set of abilities characteristic of the right hemisphere, matter more. And it's a set of abilities that we haven't taken seriously enough in this country. Now, I want to sort of distill this argument in just a few minutes, but recognize that it is an argument. This is not wishful thinking. Wouldn't it be lovely if we had economies built more on right hemisphere skills and we could all link arms and frolic around the town square together? The truth of the matter is that I happen to be a pretty left-brain guy myself. I love numbers. I'm a graph person. I'm very, very logical. I'm very sequential. But over the last couple of years, I've started studying the economies at different levels, at the level of careers, at the level of organizations, even at the level of macroeconomy. And to me, as a left-brainer, looking at it analytically, crunching the numbers, I don't even think it's close that the scales are tilting. That these abilities still matter, but they matter less. And these abilities are the first among equals now throughout advanced economies. But let me make this argument to you in a few minutes, because I think it forms the context, I think, of sort of linking up what we know from these folks here about how our brains and evolution work, and then into sort of its impact on the creative economy. So I'm going to make an argument to you, dare I say a lawyerly argument to you. It's a cause and effect argument. The effect is that the scales are tilting. These abilities still matter, but they matter less. These abilities are the first among equals. And there are three causes. Three causes. They are abundance, Asia, and automation. You're laughing at that. It took me 4 friggin' months to get them all to start with A, so don't laugh at that. Let's talk about abundance, which is actually interesting in the context of the earlier discussions here today. If you look at the data about the bottom 90%, it's staggering. But if you look at advanced economies, and I'm going to sort of look at it through the other end of the telescope here. If you look at advanced economies, if you look at places like the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Japan, Western Europe, the standard of living, the material standard of living among middle-class families, middle-class people in America and in all the advanced economies is breathtaking by historic standards and international standards. It is a stunning human achievement, just how well off materially large portions of people are in the advanced economies. It's mind-boggling to me. And in some sense, the median family in America today, that family's material life would be almost unrecognizable to our grandparents. Couple of pieces of data on this. Automobiles. 40, 50 years ago, automobile was a luxury item. Today, you have more cars in America than you have licensed drivers. It's greater than 1-to-1 ratio between cars and between the product and the users. Here's another indicia of abundance, which I think is quite interesting and sort of connects to what Chris was talking about earlier today. What's that? Storage. But in the interest of sort of coming clean here, that's actually 3196 is my self-storage unit in Bethesda, Maryland. Now, what consumer problem is self-storage trying to solve? Too much stuff. That's a peculiar problem for middle-class people to have. My grandparents were not vexed with the too much stuff problem. How big is the self-storage industry in America? It's a $21 billion a year business. It's larger than the motion picture business. That's what I mean by abundance. Now, abundance has a couple of business consequences here. All right? Here's one. What's that? Toilet brush. What kind of toilet brush? Designer toilet brush. Now, I think about my grandparents. They'd find this odd, if not a sign of the apocalypse. And we can criticize this on environmental terms, but if you think about it from a business point of view, it makes perfect sense. Let's say I decided to leave the lucrative world of writing to go into the toilet brush business. I want to sell more toilet brushes. I face a threshold challenge. What's my threshold challenge? We've solved the engineering side of the toilet brush problem, right? We can make a toilet brush that scrubs the bowl more or less well. So if I want to sell more toilet brushes, I either have to make a dramatic leap in toilet brush technology. No one has done that. Or I have to obviate the need for a toilet brush in the first place by inventing, say, a self-cleaning toilet or something like that. But a big conceptual leap in order to stand out. If I don't do that, I can compete on price, which is a losing strategy in every case. Or I can compete on, believe it or not, on something as mundane and ridiculous as this, on aesthetics, on look and feel. That more and more, the economies of advanced nations are becoming economies about significance and aesthetics and those kind of right-brain things. Now, the other way that abundance tilts the scales is by what has happened is that people have gotten richer, and we'll talk about this tomorrow with Dan Gilbert and others. People have gotten richer in advanced economies, but they haven't gotten much happier. They haven't gotten much happier. There's a gap between rising levels of prosperity and stagnating levels of satisfaction. In a sense, people have been liberated by prosperity but not fulfilled by it. I think this is one of the biggest things going on, and you see it on this stage here all the time. One of the biggest things going on in advanced economies today. Here's my third-party validator, Robert William Fogel, Nobelist in economics, who says prosperity has made it possible to extend the quest for self-realization from a minute fraction of the population to almost the whole of it. Now, it's a bit of an exaggeration, but what's happened is essentially in the Western world, certainly in Japan, in all the major economies, is basically the democratization of self-realization. Hugely important aspect of culture and business today. So that's how abundance tilts the scales. How does Asia tilt the scales? Here are 6 people I met in Mumbai. They all are computer programmers. They all do work for North American companies. Nobody here who's doing, they get paid maybe $15,000, $20,000 a year for work that you get paid $60,000 a year here, $60,000 for here. Here's the punchline on Asia. Offshoring. Overhyped in the short run, way overhyped in the short run. Just look at the numbers. If you look at the numbers, the number of jobs, white-collar jobs in America lost to offshoring in the last 3 or 4 years is less than the typical turnover of jobs in American labor markets in a month. Way overhyped. But it's underhyped in the long term. We haven't reckoned with this. If you think about it, India has 1 billion people. 1 billion people. That's a big number. So if you have, say, a fraction, 10%, 15% of India's population hitting this status, talented, ambitious, well-educated, upper middle class, if you take 15% of 1 billion, that's 150 million people. That's more than you have citizens of the UK, more than you have citizens of Japan, more than you have workers in the United States. And that's if we leave 85% of India behind. Plus, you have India becoming the world's largest English-speaking country in 3 years, and then you have cost of communication with India basically being 0. What this has meant is that this flight of white-collar jobs to the, not flight yet, but the trickle and soon a gusher of white-collar jobs, is that it's demonized one word in the economy. This is the scariest word in the economy today, routine. Routine. Any work now that is routine, white-collar work that you can reduce to a script, to a spec sheet, to a formula, to a series of steps that has a right answer, it's disappearing. It's a commodity. And that's certain kinds of work our moms and dads told us to do. It's certain kinds of work that got you in the middle class in this country and other countries over the last 30 or 40 years. Certain kinds of accounting is routine. Certain kinds of law is routine. Certain kinds of programming is routine. If you can write down the steps and it has a right answer, it's a goner. It's a goner. Now go back to our metaphor. This is the routine side. Essentially, this is becoming a commodity, racing to the cheapest cost provider, forcing us to compete more and more with this. Let's go to the next one. We got Asia. No, we've got abundance. We've got Asia, and then we've got, thank you, see, that A thing works. Automation. What do I mean by automation? It's another simple story. Last century, machines replaced our backs, our muscles. This century, software is replacing our brains. But what part of the brain can software replace? The artistic, empathic, inventive side? Not yet. Or the logical, linear, sequential, rule-based side. So you now see certain kinds of white-collar professions, white-collar functions getting nibbled and soon gobbled by automation. Let me give you some examples from the field of law. You want to get an uncontested, you're saying you're in Boston, you want to get an uncontested divorce in Boston, costs you $2,500 to go to a lawyer. But an uncontested divorce is very simple, right? No one's arguing about anything. What does a lawyer in an uncontested divorce do? Sends the bills? Well, okay, this is the benefit of my legal education, because I know that the first thing a lawyer in an uncontested divorce does is try to make it contested. But leaving that aside, for a moment, you're right, it's just filling out paperwork, right? It's routine work. What happens to routine work? We ship it overseas, or we reduce it to lines of code. So now in this great country, you have a choice. You can go to that lawyer for $2,500, or you can go online to CompleteCase.com for affordable divorce solutions, where you fill out, a couple of people writing down the URL right over there. If you fill out the form yourself, they send it to a lawyer who checks it over, and you get yourself a divorce, an uncontested divorce, for $249. Now, that's a great deal, but think about being the lawyer doing that routine white-collar work. You got a competitor charging 90% less. You can even go online. For those of you who are online, you can go to one of CompleteCase.com's competitors, which is 123divorceme.com. Check it out. You can buy... I like the little smiley face right here. Check it out. Go online right now. Check it out. It's a real place. I think it's actually $239 there, no joke. You can buy a $14 piece of software that will help you write your will. So you go to a lawyer for 2 hours rather than 10 hours. And then think about accountants. Now, accountants right now, in labor markets of this moment, 2007, accountants should be basically sending thank you letters to Congress for Sarbanes-Oxley. Because Sarbanes-Oxley is basically the Accountant Full Employment Act, at least until the programmers figure out how to automate compliance with that. But at level of personal accounting, a lot of that work has already disappeared. You had 1 million tax returns done in India last year, and people went nuts over that. Lou Dobbs, oh, this is terrible. Maybe the world's worst Lou Dobbs impression, but forgive me. But you have 21 million Americans do their taxes on TurboTax. Nobody says that this is the death of the American middle class. I bet a third of you did your tax on TurboTax. Any of you do your tax on TurboTax? Well, that's a pretty good guess. See those people back there, everyone with their hands up? You are the people with accountant blood on your hands. That is the accountant job killer. So you stack this all up, abundance, Asia, automation, and it's tilting the scales, making these left brain abilities necessary but not sufficient. The right brain ability is the first among equals. Let me just talk 30 seconds about this room emptying chart, and then we'll wrap up. This is a pattern in thinking economies here. We've seen this before. Think about this. We began in the agriculture age. We didn't really begin there, but to start the agriculture age, the age of farmers. What happened? This axis is time, by the way, and this axis is affluence, globalization, and technology. We began as farmers, okay? What happened? People got richer, so they wanted things beyond food. Technology improved, so we could grow more food with fewer people. Globalization gradually took hold. We could import food. Boom! Those nudge us into a new era, the era of factory workers, the industrial age. What happens then? Same pattern. We get richer. We want things beyond mass-produced goods. Technology improves. We can create more stuff with fewer people. Globalization takes hold. We can import mass-produced goods at a cheaper price. Bam! Move us into the new age, the age of knowledge workers, as Peter Drucker famously called it, the information age, the SAT age, the spreadsheet age. What happens? The same pattern. It's Rocky 1, Rocky 2, Rocky 3, Rocky 4. The same pattern. We get richer, so we want things beyond information and data and mundane services. We want customized, aesthetically pleasing kinds of services. With Asia, we begin to import knowledge work from other places, and we automate knowledge work, moving us into the conceptual age, the age of creators and empathizers. Here's the punchline. To make it today, you have to be able to do work that's hard to outsource, hard to automate, and that delivers significance along with utility. Hard to outsource, hard to automate, and that delivers significance along with utility. That puts a premium on these kinds of capacities, and for a whole host of reasons, our education system is woefully out of sync with that. Let me wrap up by conceding that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Here's my room emptying chart. I refuse to get rid of it because I'm a left-brain guy. But my counselors have told me, Dan, if you want to talk about right-brain thinking, you have to present this thing more in a more visual right-brain way. So as a concession to them, here is basically the evolution of economies in a single image. We began as primates, then we became farmers, and Lee, I know, I'm skipping some history here, okay? Just cut me some slack. Then we became factory workers, knowledge workers, and today creators and empathizers, people who can use the right brain, people who are empathic, people who have storytelling capabilities, people who have a design sensibility. Those hard to outsource, hard to automate, significance-based abilities are the ones that are most important in the economy today. I think that those abilities are actually a fundamental part of being human, and I think that the more we deploy those abilities, which are now valued in labor markets, the greater human impact we're going to have. Thanks.